Welcome the anointed ones. Never underestimate the one who already saw your move before you made it. Chosen ones, let's pause right here. Do you know how unsettling it is for an enemy to realize their entire plot was nothing but a rerun to you? Think about it. Chess masters aren't stressed by pawns shuffling forward because they already calculated 10 moves ahead. That's exactly what happened here. They thought they were orchestrating the perfect takedown, but you had already read the credits of their little movie before they even finished the opening scene. And here's a fact most people forget. Studies in psychology show that envy actually lowers a person's ability to strategize clearly. The more someone envies you, the less rational they become, meaning their so-called secret plot was screaming its existence long before they launched it. You didn't need special intel. Their desperation leaked through every action, every fake smile, every accidental slip of the tongue. What makes this story even sweeter is the irony. They thought you were naive, that you'd fall right into their web. But instead you let them keep weaving and weaving until they wrapped themselves up like a confused spider. The plot was never really yours to fight. It was theirs to trip over. And if we're being brutally honest, the funniest part, they still don't realize that you served them their own game, just with better seasoning. They played checkers. You played chess on a board they didn't even know existed. By the time they were celebrating a victory, you were already 3 steps past the finish line, sipping water and checking your watch. Now let's break this down, piece by piece, because the way you spotted this envious plot a mile away and flipped it back on them isn't just survival. It's strategy at its highest form. Number 1. You didn't just anticipate the plot. You read the architecture of their thinking. You didn't just anticipate the plot. You read the architecture of their thinking. That's the power of a chosen one. Most people react when things happen. You dissect why things are happening before they even show on the surface. It wasn't about guessing or being suspicious. It was about understanding patterns. People who plot out of envy have a rhythm, and their rhythm always exposes them. They leave behind certain traces in the way they talk, the way they shift around you, the way they suddenly try to appear closer than usual.
You picked up on it not because you're paranoid, but because you're trained by life to read what isn't being said. Envious plots don't just come out of nowhere. They have a design. And you saw that design because you've been around enough betrayal to know how it's stitched together. Their body language gave them away, their sudden silence in conversations, their strange curiosity about things they normally ignored. You didn't need proof in writing, you had proof in behavior. People think their intentions are hidden until they realize their intentions already live in the small cracks of their personality. That's where you caught them. The reason you read the architecture of their thinking so clearly is because you've been forced to study human behavior at a level most people never reach. While others live on the surface, you've lived in situations that trained your intuition like a survival tool. You don't just hear words, you weigh them. You don't just see smiles, you measure the tension in them. That's why their plot wasn't a surprise. It was simply the obvious conclusion to the way they had been carrying themselves all along. What unsettled them the most was that you never confronted them directly. You let them believe they had room to move while you quietly mapped out the skeleton of their scheme. To them, it felt like they were operating in secrecy. To you, it was as loud as a marching band. You saw the weak foundation of their plan long before they realized you had already factored them into your calculations. And when the moment came, you didn't need to shout, prove yourself, or scramble. You had already built your steps around their missteps. They thought they were playing you, but really they were just playing themselves. On a stage you had already walked across without tripping. Number 2, you knew their friendship was an application for access, not affection. You knew from the start that their so-called friendship wasn't built on affection, it was an application for access. There's a difference between someone who genuinely values you and someone who only wants to position themselves close enough to monitor or manipulate you. They weren't checking in to see how you were doing, they were checking in to see what you were doing. Every call, every sudden act of kindness, every offer to help wasn't genuine care. It was surveillance wrapped in politeness. You recognize the difference because you've seen it before. True friendship doesn't demand constant updates, but fake interest always comes with hidden paperwork, like they're signing themselves into your private space just to gather intel. That's how envy operates. It pretends to care, but it's actually trying to calculate. They didn't see you as a person to connect with, they saw you as a vault to break into. And the way they went about it gave them away. Their compliments felt rehearsed. Their laughter came a second too late. Their questions were never neutral. They were probes disguised as curiosity. They weren't interested in your peace, they were interested in your plans. And because you read people deeper than their words, you didn't fall for the disguise. The clever part was how you handled it. You didn't slam the door in their face because you understood something critical. Access isn't always denied by confrontation. Sometimes it's denied by control. You let them believe they had a seat at the table, but you never fed them the real meal. You gave them surface-level answers, half-truths or stories that revealed nothing. To them, it looked like you were being open. To you, it was a performance that kept your real life untouched. That's why their plot couldn't succeed, because it was being fueled by information they thought they had, but never truly did. At the heart of it, you exposed their motive without exposing yourself. That's why they grew frustrated. They applied for access thinking they would gain leverage, but instead they ended up with empty details and no real power. You showed them that proximity isn't the same as intimacy. Just because someone sits close doesn't mean they're allowed to know your core. They thought they could study you from the inside, but all they managed to study was the mask you let them see. In the end, their fake friendship backfired because they walked away with nothing but proof that you saw through them the entire time. Number 3, you realized envy makes people predictable, not dangerous. You realized early on that envy doesn't actually make people sharper, it makes them predictable. That's the irony most envious people never see. They think their jealousy fuels cleverness, but in reality, it robs them of subtlety. Their hunger to outshine you forces them into patterns that are easy to spot if you're paying attention. The moment they start plotting, they start leaving traces because envy is impatient. It can't sit quietly, it always leaks out through tone, timing, and behavior. You noticed how their energy shifted, how their sudden competitiveness became too obvious, how their conversations began circling back to you more than anyone else. That wasn't strength. It was a neon sign exposing their intentions. Predictability is their downfall. Because when you already know someone's next move, they've lost before they begin. Envy traps people in a cycle of comparison, so everything they do becomes a reaction to you. If you succeed, they scramble to create a distraction. If you withdraw, they panic at the lack of material to copy. Their entire identity starts orbiting around you, and the more they revolve, the easier it becomes to anticipate their schemes. They thought they were playing chess, but their envy reduced them to a script you could read line by line. This is why you weren't shaken when the plot revealed itself. You had already mapped out how it would unfold. Their envy didn't give them an edge, it gave you foresight. The more desperate they grew to sabotage, the more transparent their tactics became. A slip of the tongue here, an unnecessary question there, an exaggerated story whispered to the wrong person. It all added up. They thought they were covering their tracks, but their envy made them careless, rushing to damage you before patience could have kept them hidden. The brilliance of your response was that you didn't need to expose every detail of what you knew. You simply stayed steps ahead. You let their predictability corner them. When someone is driven by envy, they're always reacting, never creating. That means they can't innovate a real threat. They can only imitate or sabotage. And both of those are doomed strategies when you're already aware of the pattern. By the time they realized you saw through them, it was too late. They weren't the danger they imagined themselves to be. They were predictable opponents, trying to surprise someone who had already memorized the script of their envy. Number 4, you served them cold revenge without getting dirty. You served them cold revenge without getting dirty, and that's what shook them the most. They expected drama. They expected you to lose your composure, to swing back, to give them a war they could thrive in, but you refused to hand them the stage they were desperate for. Instead, you stepped back and let the weight of their own schemes do the work. That's a level of power most people will never understand. Winning without lifting your hands, proving a point without raising your voice. The truth is, people who plot out of envy rely on reaction. They don't actually have the strength to destroy you outright. They need you to participate in your own downfall. They wait for you to defend yourself loudly, to break character, to start throwing punches so they can point and say, "See, that's the real them." But you denied them that script. You stayed calm, you stayed grounded, and you let their own actions expose them. Revenge didn't come through chaos, it came through patience. You gave them the silence of a courtroom and let the evidence stack against them until they sentenced themselves. The beauty of it is how invisible the battlefield became. There were no shouting matches, no messy public explosions, no scorched earth left behind. To the outside world, it looked like you did nothing at all. And that's exactly why it cut deeper. Because while they were busy plotting, gossiping, and trying to orchestrate your downfall, you were simply living. You were building, growing, moving forward, and every step you took forward highlighted how stuck they were in the swamp of their own bitterness. They fell into the pit they dug, not because you pushed them, but because they couldn't resist the urge to keep digging. That's the trap of envy. It convinces people that the more they work against you, the closer they are to victory, when in reality they're burying themselves alive. You didn't need to smear their name, sabotage their plans, or retaliate with venom. The cleanest revenge was watching them lose everything they tried to steal from you. Credibility, peace, respect, without you ever getting dirty. And now, when people look at the wreckage, the only fingerprints they see belong to them. Number 5, you treated their lies like currency that eventually devalues. You treated their lies like currency that eventually devalues. And that's where you won without even lifting a finger. They were reckless spenders, tossing gossip and fabrications around like they were dealing in gold. At first it may have looked convincing. Some people even bought into it because lies often feel shinier than truth in the beginning. But just like counterfeit bills, it didn't take long before the flaws started to show. Their words couldn't hold weight because lies don't age well. Over time, the inconsistencies began to pile up, the contradictions surfaced, and the same people they once fooled started realizing the truth had more stability than their stories ever could. That's the thing about lies. They always come with an expiration date. The more they talked, the faster they devalued themselves. Every attempt to discredit you only chipped away at their own credibility. People began noticing how their words never matched reality, how they always seemed to be the one with a negative report, how their stories changed depending on the audience. They didn't just sabotage your reputation, they sabotaged their own integrity in the process. The very gossip they believed would bankrupt you became the debt they couldn't pay back. You understood from the beginning that silence wasn't weakness, it was a strategy. By refusing to play their game, you allowed time to do the heavy lifting. Truth doesn't rush, it stands. Lies sprint in the beginning, but they always collapse under the weight of exposure. And while they were busy investing in a fake economy of rumors, you kept investing in reality. You kept producing results, showing growth, and living authentically. That contrast alone was enough to reveal where the real value was. Eventually, people stopped listening to them. Their words became background noise, empty chatter that no longer carried influence. The more they tried to double down, the more desperate they looked. It's like watching someone try to pay for something with play money. Embarrassing, obvious, and unsustainable. They thought their plot would make you look fake, but in the end, they exposed themselves as the fraud. Their credibility became the collateral damage, and once it was gone, there was no way to buy it back. You didn't need revenge, because the natural law of truth versus lies always tipped the scales in your favor. Number 6. You saw the spiritual signature of their plot before the physical manifestation. You saw the spiritual signature of their plot before the physical manifestation, and that's why they never stood a real chance. Most people only react when events become visible, when betrayal is spoken out loud, when sabotage is already in motion, when the attack is already cutting. But you weren't relying on the surface. You were tuned into a deeper frequency, one that detects intentions long before they're acted out. You could feel the energy shift around you, the sudden heaviness in their presence, the unspoken malice hiding behind their forced smiles. That wasn't paranoia. It was discernment sharpened through experience, hardship, and divine sensitivity. Discernment is what separated you from the crowd. Others may have thought everything looked normal, but you could sense the fingerprints of darkness hovering around their behavior. It was in the way conversations started carrying hidden edges, in the way their eyes couldn't hold yours for too long, in the sudden eagerness to know details of your life that didn't concern them. Spiritually, those signals were loud. You didn't need physical evidence because the spiritual evidence had already testified. By the time they moved in flesh, you had already guarded your spirit, protected your path, and fortified your peace. That's the advantage of being spiritually awake. You don't fight battles on the wrong level. If you waited until their schemes appeared physically, you might have wasted energy trying to untangle their lies or repair the damage of their actions. But because you intercepted it in spirit, you cut the power source before it could fuel their plot. Their plan looked alive on the outside, but it was already dead inside. What frustrates them the most is that they can't understand how you keep seeing through them. To them, it feels like you're reading their mind, but in reality, you're reading the energy behind their mask. Spirit doesn't lie. They can fake words, they can fake gestures, but they can't fake the vibration of envy and malice that follows them like a shadow. You recognized it instantly, and instead of panicking, you simply prepared. By the time they tried to strike, it was like swinging at a locked door. They wasted energy but never penetrated. Their plot failed before it even started because spiritually you had already neutralized the attack. And that's the difference. You don't just survive betrayal, you disarm it before it arrives. Number 7, you weaponize silence without it being weakness. You weaponize silence without it being weakness. And that's where your true power showed. Too often people confuse silence with surrender, as if holding your tongue means you've lost. But in your case, silence wasn't avoidance, it was precision. You didn't stay quiet because you had nothing to say. You stayed quiet because you understood that not every battle deserves your voice. Silence became your scalpel, sharp enough to cut without ever being seen, controlled enough to strike only where it mattered most. They wanted noise. They needed you to fight back publicly, to raise your voice, to give them something to point at. That's the trap of manipulators. They provoke, then pretend to be the victim when you finally respond. But you didn't give them the satisfaction. You denied them the oxygen of attention, and in doing so, you suffocated their schemes. Lies thrive when they are constantly fed, when they are entertained, when they are argued against. By not responding, you starved their rumors until they began to collapse under their own emptiness. What's remarkable is how silence turned the mirror back on them. With no distractions from you, all that was left for people to see was their behavior. Every word they spoke, every rumor they spread, every attempt to drag your name through the mud stood alone, unsupported, unprovoked. And because you refused to play into it, they ended up drowning in the echo of their own lies. Their stories began to contradict each other, their bitterness became obvious, and their desperation grew louder without you lifting a finger. Silence forced them to expose themselves in ways that words never could. But this wasn't passive silence, it was disciplined silence. It wasn't about retreating, it was about controlling the battlefield. You knew that your voice carried too much weight to be wasted on nonsense. You knew that your reputation, your actions, and your consistency were louder than anything they could ever invent. So you stood still, let the dust settle, and watched as truth separated itself from fiction. In the end, your silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. It was strategic, powerful, and effective. While they were busy performing, you stayed still, and that stillness revealed the difference between you and them. Your silence didn't show weakness, it proved mastery. Number 8, you knew their plot couldn't outlast your consistency. You knew their plot couldn't outlast your consistency, and that's exactly where everything they built began to collapse. Plots are fueled by urgency. They rely on chaos, quick reactions, and shock value to create momentum. The whole point is to destabilize you, to make you act out of character, to get you flustered, to force you into errors. But you didn't give them that. Instead of panicking, you stayed steady. You kept showing up the same way you always did, delivering results, maintaining your routine, proving your character. That consistency dismantled their entire timeline because plots can't survive without chaos. They sprinted because they thought they had to take you down before the truth revealed itself. That's why their lies felt rushed, why their actions looked sloppy, why they grew increasingly desperate. Envy doesn't allow patience. It breeds anxiety. They wanted you to crack quickly so they could claim victory. But when you didn't budge, when you didn't shift, when your steady rhythm kept beating like a drum, their plans started to starve. What they expected to be a short, explosive downfall turned into a drawn-out embarrassment. Consistency works like erosion. It doesn't always make a loud impact immediately, but it wears down every false structure over time. While they scrambled to invent new angles, your stability made each attempt look weaker. People began to notice the difference. Their drama was always loud and frantic, but your life kept producing quiet, steady evidence. The more they tried to sprint ahead of truth, the further behind they looked. Their plot had an expiration date from the beginning, because lies can't hold shape against a consistent reality. What frustrated them the most was how unshaken you were. They threw everything at you: gossip, manipulation, false alliances, but your patience was like a slow burn they couldn't fight. You let time do the heavy lifting, and time is always loyal to truth. They thought they had speed on their side, but you knew endurance wins the race. By walking steadily, you forced their strategy to collapse under its own weight. In the end, their plot didn't fail because you fought harder. It failed because you stood firmer. Consistency was your shield, your weapon, and your testimony. And when the dust settled, the only thing still standing strong was you, while their schemes lay scattered, exhausted, and irrelevant. Number 9. You made the plot collapse under the weight of truth. You made the plot collapse under the weight of truth, and that's the kind of victory that can't be fabricated. They expected you to fight back with anger, to lash out, to scramble for proof of your innocence. That's how most people handle being lied on, by trying to out-scream the accuser. But you knew better. You didn't need to prove yourself with noise, because your truth was already speaking louder than their fiction. You kept living, kept showing up, kept walking in alignment with who you are. And while they wasted their energy scripting lies, your consistency built undeniable evidence. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't need an audience, but when it finally shows up, it demands one. Lies are dramatic, full of props, full of overacting. They may draw attention at first, but they can't withstand close inspection. Over time, the cracks in their story began to show. Their timelines didn't match. Their accusations contradicted each other. Their bitterness became obvious. Meanwhile, your life carried no contradictions. It stood solid. Eventually, people looked at both sides and saw exactly who was authentic and who was performing. The plot collapsed, not because you shouted it down, but because it couldn't hold its own weight against what was undeniably real. What made this collapse even more devastating for them was that it happened naturally. You didn't orchestrate some grand reveal. You didn't go around gathering allies to defend you. You let time strip away the costume until all that was left was the raw truth. And when the mask came off, it wasn't you who looked exposed, it was them. They had spent so much energy constructing a full stage, and when it fell apart, the crowd realized the fraud had never been you. This was your greatest advantage. You trusted truth enough to let it do the work. You didn't need desperation, because desperation belongs to liars trying to keep a sinking story afloat. You didn't need rage, because rage is what guilty people use when they've run out of evidence. You just kept being exactly who you are, and that was more than enough. Their fiction wasn't destroyed by your retaliation. It was destroyed by its own weakness. And when the curtain dropped, everyone could see clearly. The one standing in truth was you, and the ones scrambling in the rubble were them. Number 10, you understood that envy is just admiration that mutated. You understood that envy is just admiration that mutated, and that's what gave you the upper hand. People rarely admit it, but envy always begins with admiration. They saw something in you, your discipline, your resilience, your uniqueness that they wished they had for themselves. At first it fascinated them, but fascination without humility easily twists into resentment. Instead of being inspired, they grew bitter. Instead of asking themselves what they could learn, they obsessed over how they could tear you down. Their hatred wasn't born from your flaws. It was born from your strengths. That's why their plot was never really about you. It was about the reflection you held up to them. Being around you reminded them of what they weren't willing to become. Your consistency highlighted their lack of follow-through. Your integrity exposed their shortcuts. Your ability to rise without begging for validation made them realize how dependent they were on being seen. Every quality they tried to discredit in you was something they secretly admired but couldn't cultivate within themselves. And because they lacked the discipline to grow, they chose the cheaper option: attack. It's almost tragic when you think about it. Envy is proof that they once admired you. But the admiration mutated into poison the moment they realized it demanded effort they weren't willing to put in. Their obsession with you became a way of distracting themselves from their own inadequacy. Plotting against you was easier than facing their lack of discipline, easier than fixing their own flaws, easier than owning up to the fact that you built what they only daydreamed about. You weren't their enemy, you were their mirror, and they couldn't stand the reflection. The beauty is, you saw it for what it was. And that's why you didn't internalize their hatred. You didn't shrink yourself to make them comfortable because you knew their anger wasn't really directed at you, it was directed at the parts of themselves they refused to confront. And that's the sharp truth. Envy is just admiration that rotted because it wasn't watered with humility. They hated you because you represented the proof that it was possible, and they couldn't live with that. So they plotted not against your life, but against their own limitations. And when it all came crashing down, the truth stood tall. You were never their problem, their lack of discipline was. Number 11, you turned their own strategy into a boomerang. You turned their own strategy into a boomerang, and that's why they couldn't win no matter how hard they tried. Everything they threw at you ended up circling back to them, but not because you mimicked their methods. You didn't waste time copying their tactics. You redirected them. Their gossip, meant to destroy you, only amplified your name. The more they spoke, the more attention you gained. Some people may have listened to their lies at first, but curiosity always leads people to investigate the person being targeted. And when they looked at you directly, what they saw didn't match the stories. In the end, their words served as free advertising for your character. The sabotage they planned only made you sharper. Every obstacle they planted in your path forced you to adapt, grow, and refine yourself in ways you might not have otherwise. What they thought would slow you down actually gave you endurance. What they thought would humiliate you only toughened your resolve. Sabotage works against people who are fragile, but against someone like you, disciplined, alert, and chosen, it became training ground. Their attempts to weaken you turned into the very weightlifting that built your strength. Their lies, which they thought would bury you, ended up giving you platforms. Each false claim gave you an opportunity to stand in undeniable truth. And when the truth surfaced, it didn't just clear your name, it highlighted the difference between your reality and their fiction. People realized that the only thing consistent about your enemies was their dishonesty, while the only thing consistent about you was your integrity. That contrast gave you credibility they could never buy. Even their venom worked against them. Hatred, jealousy, and bitterness are toxic to the people who hold them, not to the ones they aim at. Their venom fertilized your soil because it gave you motivation, focus, and clarity. Every attack reminded you that you were worth targeting, which only confirmed the value of your purpose. And while they poisoned themselves with their own bitterness, you harvested the growth that came from staying disciplined under pressure. That's why their strategy became a boomerang. It never truly hit you. It kept circling back, striking them harder than they ever intended. They tried to make your life smaller, but all they did was make your impact larger. In trying to bury you, they became the ones digging their own graves. Number 12, you saw their plot as a classroom, not a crisis. You saw their plot as a classroom, not a crisis, and that's what separated you from everyone else who has been through betrayal. Most people panic when they realize someone is scheming against them. They lose focus, they question their worth, they spend sleepless nights trying to figure out why. But you didn't waste your energy like that. You switched into observation mode. You treated the situation like a living case study, something to analyze and learn from instead of something to drown in. Every betrayal became a lecture. Every shady move became a textbook example. Every snake in the grass became a reminder of how to identify deception before it grows too close. That's the kind of mindset that turns pain into power. You didn't just endure their schemes, you took notes. You noticed how envy disguises itself as fake support. You caught how gossipers always reveal themselves by talking too much. You recognized how manipulators overplay their hand when they think no one is watching. These weren't just attacks against you, they were lessons in human nature. And because you refused to be blinded by bitterness, you walked away with a deeper understanding that can't be taught in any classroom. The irony is, while they thought they were putting you through hell, they were actually sharpening your discernment. They were unknowingly training you to spot betrayal from miles away. They thought they were wasting your time, but they were enriching your wisdom. They believed they were breaking you down, but all they really did was add new layers of awareness to your character. You didn't just survive, you graduated with honors from a school they never even realized they were running. And here's the part that hurts them the most. You gained something they'll never have. They walked away bitter, exposed and drained, while you walked away seasoned, discerning and unshakable. Their only legacy from the plot is shame and ruined credibility. But your legacy is wisdom, an advantage that will protect you for life. You turned what could have been your downfall into a masterclass in resilience. They were too blind to realize it, but in the end, you didn't just escape their scheme. You elevated above it with knowledge they'll never possess. Number 13. You proved that some plots don't need confrontation, just exposure. You proved that some plots don't need confrontation, just exposure. That's the genius of how you handled it. You didn't run around trying to convince anyone of your innocence. You didn't waste your breath arguing with liars who were already committed to their script. Instead, you let time do what it always does, separate truth from performance. That's a level of restraint most people never reach because ego always wants to defend itself. But you understood that defending yourself against falsehoods sometimes only gives them power. So, you stayed still while their lies grew tired of holding themselves up. The thing about exposure is that it doesn't come with noise, it comes with clarity. When lies meet time, they start to unravel because no one can keep up the act forever. Stories begin to contradict, characters start slipping, patterns show through the cracks. And while all that was happening, you remained consistent, calm and rooted. That consistency was your greatest witness. While they were stumbling over their fabrications, you were quietly living proof of who you really are. The beauty of this approach is that exposure punishes in a way confrontation never could. A loud argument might have given them sympathy, but exposure stripped them naked in front of the very people they wanted to impress. When truth finally walked into the room, their lies had nowhere left to sit. It wasn't just that people stopped believing them. It's that people began questioning why they ever believed them in the first place. Their credibility collapsed under the weight of their own deception. And here's the sharp edge of it all. Exposure is permanent. Confrontation might be forgotten, but once someone is exposed, the image of who they really are stays burned into people's minds. That's why your enemies are still unsettled. You didn't just defeat them in the moment, you rewrote their reputation forever. By refusing to lower yourself to their level, you guaranteed that when the truth surfaced, it would shine brighter than any defense you could have spoken. You didn't just survive the plot, you let it collapse under its own false weight. And now, the silence of your restraint is echoing louder than any battle cry ever could. That's the power of exposure. It ends the game without you even lifting a finger. Number 14, you left them starving for the reaction they never got. You left them starving for the reaction they never got. And that's exactly why their plot fell apart faster than they imagined. Plots don't survive in silence or composure. They need drama to stay alive. They wanted your rage, your tears, your panic, your meltdown. They wanted you to give them the emotional fuel that would justify their lies and keep their story entertaining. But instead, you gave them nothing. You stripped them of the very oxygen they needed, and without it, their scheme suffocated. That's the ultimate checkmate, refusing to play the role they wrote for you. They rehearsed how they would handle your outrage. They were prepared to mock your pain, to spin your anger into more gossip, to magnify your emotions as proof that they were right about you. But when you stayed calm, when you didn't break down, when you carried on as though their plot didn't define you, you robbed them of the one thing they couldn't fabricate, your reaction. And without that reaction, their entire story fell flat. It's not that you didn't feel the sting of betrayal. It's that you refused to give them the show they were waiting for. That discipline is what unsettled them most. People addicted to drama don't know how to process peace. They can twist your words, but they can't twist your silence when it's rooted in strength. They can predict chaos, but they can't predict someone who chooses composure over conflict. That unpredictability made you untouchable. Here's the part that eats at them even now. They were left looking like the only ones obsessed, desperate, and unhinged. Without your participation, their performance was a one-man circus. And eventually the audience noticed. It became clear who was creating noise and who was standing solid. That contrast exposed everything they wanted to hide. So yes, you left them starving. You denied them the feast of your downfall they were salivating over. And instead of being remembered for their cleverness, they're remembered for their failure. Because when someone sets a trap, nothing is more humiliating than realizing the person they wanted to catch never even stepped into the arena. That's how you won. Not by fighting harder, but by refusing to feed their hunger. In the end, the story isn't about the envy, the schemes, or the plots. They were never the real threat. The real story is about you. A chosen one who sees what others can't, who moves with clarity while chaos rages around, and who turns attacks into lessons, manipulation into momentum, and venom into growth. You didn't just survive their schemes. You transcended them. Every lie they told, every trap they set, every desperate attempt to provoke you only revealed their weakness and strengthened your mastery. You anticipated, observed, restrained, and redirected energy with precision. You let truth do the work while their fiction collapsed under its own weight. You weaponized silence, built consistency, and exposed their motives without ever playing their game. What they failed to realize is that they weren't just plotting against you. They were revealing themselves, and in exposing themselves, they handed you the ultimate advantage, insight, control, and undeniable proof that their power was an illusion. You didn't need confrontation, you didn't need vengeance, you needed patience, discernment, and wisdom, and you had all three in abundance. Their plots starved, their lies devalued, their envy became transparent, and their obsession turned inward. Meanwhile, you rose steadily, silently, and unshakably. This isn't just victory, it's mastery. It's the kind of triumph that can't be faked, borrowed, or stolen. It's the proof that true power isn't loud, it isn't reactive, and it isn't desperate. It's calm, deliberate, and rooted in truth. You didn't just survive a plot, you transformed it into your classroom, your weapon, and your platform. You walked out wiser, stronger, and untouchable. And now the ones who tried to bring you down are left exposed, frustrated, and irrelevant, while you continue to thrive, proving with every step that their schemes were never capable of stopping someone who is already operating on a higher plane. This is the essence of being the chosen one. Seeing beyond the immediate, moving beyond the petty, and rising above every plan meant to contain you. You didn't just beat the game. They didn't even realize the board had changed. If you felt the power in this story and the lessons it holds, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the insights that elevate you above the chaos. Like this video if it hit deep, comment with your thoughts or experiences, and share it with anyone who needs to see how mastery and truth always win. Your engagement isn't just support, it's part of building a community that sees, understands, and rises above every plot and scheme. Don't just watch, be part of the movement. God bless you.